What's good, everybody? Romero17 here, and this is not UFC 5. This is UFC 3. And you're probably wondering, why am I bringing up UFC 3 and not UFC 4 or something like that? Because issues from this game are now coming into light in UFC 5, and I'm going to explain why. So, now that we have a game on PS5, the reaction time is a little bit easier to hit. The game is running at higher frames per second. And now more issues with not just denials on the ground, but just takedown defense in general at a higher level are showing that even with the best of the best guys, it is almost impossible to get a good takedown without having to bail on somebody. You can't really chain takedowns together with somebody with a high level moveset. And where in real life, I can have a takedown denied ever so briefly. I'm not going to just simply concede position. I still have a chance to turn. And I'm going to provide some in real life clips of myself hitting takedowns after some initial denials. Now that we've shown you some real life examples, I'm no Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? But I'm a decent grappler. If I go and I show Khabib's stats in comparison to Conor McGregor, he has a 98 takedown offense. Conor McGregor has an 89 takedown defense. If we take a look at this stat, that means that when I have grapple advantage, in theory, when I have grapple advantage, my takedown should become much easier. When I get an initial takedown denied in UFC 4 and 5, it should be easier for me to chain into other takedowns because I'm a lifelong grappler. I'm expected to have my initial shot stuffed or whatnot, or the first denial, and I'm chaining on to the next finish. That is how high-level grapplers work. At the highest level, it's very rare to get the first initial shot. You're always transitioning to a different finish. That's not the case in UFC 4 and 5. The other thing is, too, with 98 takedown offense, that allows Khabib Nurmagomedov to have access in this game to the low single and the undeniable takedown. UFC 4 and 5, they no longer have the undeniable takedown, and the low single is based on the moveset. If they gave the person the low single, which I'm okay with, because some guys had the low single that really shouldn't have had it. But when I show you guys the speed of Khabib Nurmagomedov's low single in comparison to UFC 4 and 5, you're going to see, wow, this is significantly different. So if we take a look at the takedown speed of the low single for Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 3, this is the speed. That is much faster than whatever it is on UFC 4 and 5. And this entry also helped out with grapple advantage, right? If you had a high grapple advantage, that was even faster. Now, we'll get on grapple advantage in a bit and how that should play into takedown entries, but we're going to do some comparison. If I have Conor McGregor shoot a double leg, that's how far he can really go. And then that's his, the regular single leg. It's just level changing and snagging the leg, which you can also do with a double, but that's a whole different discussion. If we compare that to Khabib Nurmagomedov, that is the range of his drop step with the double leg. Now, because he has the low single active, it's automatically going to go there when he's at a specific range. But, as you can see right there, he could snatch that single from that range, akin to what Kamaru Usman does. That's not really the case in UFC 4 and 5. Now, even though in UFC 4 and 5 you can get your opponent pressed up against the cage, you'll be able to have them concede GA. You see right there, it's conceding grapple advantage because his back is to the cage. This does make the low single slightly easier to get. Slightly, ever so slightly. But your entry, if I go and I shoot a takedown here and I enter, right? And mind you, we're missing these positions too. And I try to go for this specific takedown here. And they change the animation in UFC 4 and 5. That can still get easily denied by anybody, regardless of takedown defense stat. And that's part of the issue. Once you kind of know the denials for everything, it doesn't really matter who you have. There's nothing that changes based on the grapple advantage, based on the takedown stat, versus the takedown defense. And that's a huge part of why the takedowns don't feel that good. And that the only way you can really get a takedown on anybody that's good is by basically bailing on the level change from the double leg bail. And even though that's not really an exhaustive thing to do because you're effectively crashing in, that's not how it should always be. Especially when you consider that in UFC 4 and 5, if I were to take a shot with Khabib and I enter against the cage, this would be an automatic reversal for Conor McGregor if he were to deny that initially. It's almost impossible to try to get the turn unless you're already pre-inputting that turn after you've done that shot. And even then, it's not a full guarantee, even if there's a discrepancy between the stats. And before I make my point on that, on a deeper level, we're also going to talk about this. In real life, what prevents pressure from not just a counter? We're not going to talk about counter striking and how that can alone be a deterrent to somebody pressuring you. That's already going to be a separate topic. We're specifically talking about grappling. And just even in striking too, there's things that happen when somebody gets too close. There's things that you are more susceptible to when you overcommit on shots. Part of that is crashing in, right? If somebody's throwing shots at me, because there's an invisible wall in UFC 3, 4, and 5, there's no crash. It's not even an undisputed. There's no official crashing of the players when somebody overcommits on a shot that automatically leads to a clinch position. But at the very least, it should be like a clinch input, correct? That allows you to crash in. I slip a shot, I input the clinch, I should be able to get into over-under. Or I duck underneath a hook, I use that as an entry to go and take your back. Or I use that as an entry to go into my shot. We've seen multiple real-life examples. We've seen Charles Oliveira do so to Dustin Poirier. We've seen Khabib Nurmagomedov multiple times in his career. We've seen, there's just so many examples. So what prevents pressure when, let's say, a striker and a grappler in MMA, roughly around the same level of MMA experience. The striker is aware that his opponent is looking to grapple. The grappler is aware that the striker is trying to knock him the hell out. So it comes down to who's going to make a specific mistake first. For the striker, it is relatively giving up their hips first, exposing themselves in position. The crazier strikes that this person throws, or the longer they stay in extended combinations, the bigger the window is for the person who is the grappler to see and decide how they're going to make their entry into the clinch or into a takedown entry. And in UFC 3, 4, and 5, that is not the case. So, I deliberately put Conor McGregor at a long-term stamina disadvantage against Khabib Nurmagomedov to show my point. Pay attention. The grapple advantage meter is in the middle of the screen. I have Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor. I'm going to have Conor McGregor throw a 4-piece combination. It's going to be the jab, cross, lead uppercut, and back to the cross again. So before I tell y'all what it is, I want y'all to pay attention and see if you guys can see it for yourselves. Alright? 4-shot combo. Did you guys notice? If you noticed, congratulations, you have a keen eye. If you didn't notice, I don't blame y'all. This can go over a lot of people's heads. Despite the low short-term stamina from me throwing a lot of shots, that didn't have a factor on how much GA I was conceding to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Most importantly, did you also notice that these shots, all getting whiffed, did not have a cumulative GA adding on top of the other? They are not stacking. The amount of whiffs that I'm having with Conor McGregor, they are not stacking, which means it treats each shot as an individual. It's only individually punishing that one shot. So let's see here. Lead hook, right? I'm going to throw the wombo combo. Jab. Let's go. Jab, rear uppercut, lead hook. Look at that. 3-piece combo. Low short-term stamina. Did not concede much GA at all. And that's part of what's killing the takedown entries on UFC 5. Hey, that was also a thing on UFC 3 and 4 and 5 and even on 2. So that is one of the biggest adjustments that EA has to do to fix the takedowns. The lower my short-term stamina is when I'm throwing my strike, the more grapple advantage I should be conceding. On top of that, the more that I'm throwing in combination and the more consecutive whiffs that I have, the more GA I should be conceding to make the takedown entry stronger. On top of that, right, takedowns off of combinations, takedowns off of head movement should come easier, right? If I'm successfully landing my shots, the flow of the takedown from my strike should flow into my takedown entry. Now I'm back on UFC 3 to show y'all another point. There is not much of a discrepancy between the stats of takedown offense versus takedown defense, and that has been a thing since UFC 3. Worse in UFC 3 because we had takedown counters in this game. So I'm going to put myself as Conor McGregor. Just to highlight, this has been a generational issue. So I'm going to concede grapple advantage to Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? And remember, a lot of grapplers in MMA, they shoot knowing the first shot is going to be denied. I showed y'all the clips early in this video, and then you get to your next finish. That's why the initial shot isn't always going to score. If you grappled in real life, you know this. So, I'm going to have Khabib Nurmagomedov shoot a double leg, right? Here in this game, right, we had the double under counters, you know, the takedown counters and whatnot, right? But I'm going to concede some GA here. You see that right there? Still had a window to deny it. Wasn't the automatic free denial. But, you know, cost me a little bit of stamina today at that point. But I conceded a good amount of GA. Right, I'm going to hold high block again. I'm going to have Khabib shoot. This UFC 5. The low single, right? If I'm holding high block, right, he shoots for a single. Still going to be denied relatively easy. Now, it taxes me a little bit more off of the GA. But that's kind of my point. The higher GA that I have too, that should also affect the amount of drain on the defender. If I'm shooting bad shots, if I'm shooting on this Conor McGregor when he has high grapple advantage, then my takedown should drain more stamina off myself because it's a bad entry. On top of that too, the more damaged my legs are, because this is a thing, the more leg damage that I've accrued as myself using Conor, look, I get GA, right? And we see this when a guy's leg gets busted up, it becomes harder for them to get takedowns. So this is already kind of prevalent in game, but we already know that the GA doesn't really do that much for the offensive guy. Helps a lot more on the defensive end, excuse me. But especially, you know, we see Magomed Ankalaev versus Jan Blachowicz. He waited too long to get his takedowns going, and his legs got chewed up, so he made the takedown entries harder. Did it stop him from getting the takedowns when Jan Blachowicz overcommitted on a shot? No, he was still able to get takedowns a little bit later in the fight, but it did make it a little bit harder. So you have to take that into consideration. My point is, when you have somebody with that much of a discrepancy in their takedown offense and their takedown defense, now consider the stats, the move levels. The denial alone has to take into consideration of what that window is to deny this person's takedowns. It should be a lot harder to deny a takedown using Edson Barboza against Khabib Nurmagomedov versus, say, Michael Johnson shooting on Edson Barboza, right? Unless I set up the shot accordingly with my hands and then level changing into my entry and getting into my double or my single or whatever I have to do. The other thing I'm going to add on to this conversation is two things in UFC 3 that are not in UFC 4 or 5. Those takedown animations are not in UFC 4 and 5, and they need to be re-implemented as other tools for when somebody is overcommitting on shots, especially flowing them off of head movement, or when they're coming in and lunging in out of the way with like a leg kick from God knows how long, boom, you made yourself more susceptible to a takedown. That's how it works. And of course, the issue that we've discussed, and where it's only registering that one strike to concede GA, as opposed to combining everything together. Because if I go and I throw, look at that. I'm already conceding the GA on this, by the way, before I even fully commit to the shot, right? But look, when I throw the cross right after, completely reduces the GA that I give up. So we're going to keep that in mind. But if we look at the shot entry for Khabib Nurmagomedov, right, I'm going to have Conor McGregor throw 1, 2, 3. right? And I'm gonna duck underneath. Let's hope. That's a very slow shot entry. It is not a fast shot entry at all. Not at all. And that needs to get adjusted, right? Look at that. Extremely slow. You guys saw the UFC 3 entry for the low single. Let's go take a look at the low single for Khabib Nurmagomedov. Look how slow that is in comparison. And he has the same takedown offense that he has in UFC 3. So, all of the points that I brought up to y'all, from discussing the takedown ranges based on the stats, the takedown denial window cannot just be because we have the low block that we should be automatically granted denials on that alone. These stats have to play a factor when we have specific character matchups. It's cool we have everything great with the TBS system. I love the TBS system. It's great. But to make grapplers much more viable outside of that, to alleviate pressure from strikers after whatever stamina change there's going to be and tracking changes that need to be done, you still need to have that threat behind you of you picking a grappler outside of, all right, I don't want to go down into Brian Ortega's guard, so as long as I just pre-deny after every single 3-4 piece combination I throw, I'll be fine. He won't be able to take me down, and that's it. Right? I can just throw as many combinations as I want, and I don't ever have to worry about throwing myself out of position. That needs to be taken into consideration when they make the adjustments. We discussed the grapple advantage meter. The grapple advantage meter is not adding everything together from whiff shots. And the lower short-term stamina advantage that you have, or disadvantage that you have, excuse me, then you should be conceding more GA on that shot. Right? Especially after a whiff. It's one thing if you're successfully landing the combination. That's a different story. If you're landing on the block or you're landing on your opponent. But when you're whiffing too, and your opponent is using head movement, that needs to be taken into consideration to really make the fighters feel like, look, when I go against this guy, I don't want to overcommit with this shot because he's going to get right in, he's going to shoot right in, he's going to take me down, and that puts me at risk to losing the fight. That's how it should be. That's how it should work when you're using grapplers in MMA. That's what shuts down people from overthrowing too many shots if they're not that much better than you. So, this is also going to segue into another video I'm going to use UFC 3 as a reference to because some of y'all may not have realized how devastating this was. And it's going to be discussing about negative GA. So, bottom control, top control, right? Conor McGregor has 89 top control. Khabib Nurmagomedov has a 93 bottom control. Wouldn't matter if you get put in side control. And by now, because the game is running on PS5, things are easier to deny, all that stuff. We're going to get into why this negative GA is such a huge issue in the EA UFC 5 franchise since UFC 4, UFC 3, UFC 2. But that's going to be it for this video on how to really buff the takedowns on UFC 5. A lot of issues, but this can be done. Remember 17. Hopefully you guys appreciate this. I'm out of here.